So I want to thank you all so much for being here. My name is Heidi Rose, and I am the chairperson of the Department of Communication. The story of this particular exhibition begins with loss. My dear friends, Joyce and John Allen, lost their son, Christopher Allen, several months ago in South Sudan at the age of 26. He was an international freelance journalist, and he covered conflict areas all over the world, places that are often overlooked by many. So when I was at Chris's memorial service, I met several freelance journalists who had come to honor Chris. They were Chris's friends. Two of them curated this exhibition, O.C. Greenway and Anna Elling. And I discovered, meeting them, what the War Zone Freelance Project is all about. And Chris was part of this group. It's an organization made up of international freelance journalists to support each other and to give their work a wider public audience. So after meeting Anna and O.C. and discovering that they were going to be in the Philadelphia area for at least a few months, I thought that there could be no better place to have a North American premiere of the War Zone Freelance Project than right here at Villanova, because there had been exhibitions in other parts of the world, but never in the US or the North American continent. And so this seemed like a perfect way to honor Chris and the work of all of these journalists. And so I talked to my friend and colleague, Bryan Kraebel, who was incredibly generous and supportive to have the WFI, the Waterhouse Family Institute, support this project. And that's how this story is continuing. So even though the story begins in loss, this story is continuing with resolve and with hope. Chris was known to quote the filmmaker Werner Herzog, who said, "The poet does not look away from what is happening in the world. To understand what happens, you need to face it." So here we honor the life and the work of Christopher Allen, and we have the honor of witnessing the work of all these other international freelance journalists who are committed to telling the stories that otherwise may not be told or might be told filtered through a different kind of lens. So thank you all so much again for being here. And there are a few people who are going to speak, and then after some of these talks, there's going to be a video which will tell you more about, and then there's also going to be just a small reception at around 2:30. So we hope to continue the dialogue, the conversation, and honor all this work. So let me turn it over now to my friend Bryan Kraebel, fellow faculty member and director of the Waterhouse Family Institute.
Thank you, Heidi. And I promise not to take up too much of your time. I know I'm not the person that y'all are here to hear from. Again, my name is Bryan Kraebel. I'm the director of the Waterhouse Family Institute here at Villanova University, which is an endowed institute that celebrates the connection between communication and social justice. And so we have an endowed fund that every year does a variety of things to really enhance and celebrate that connection, one of which are events and symposia. And so when Heidi came to me to sort of talk about the World Conflict exhibition, I mean, for me, it makes sense to really emphasize the connection between journalism and social justice at a moment in our country and elsewhere where the free press is under attack. It certainly seems that celebrating journalists and the work and bravery and courage of journalists is one way to really emphasize the vital role that it plays in the creation of a more just social world. And then this exhibition specifically focusing on conflict photography, again, that connection is just so clear to me that I think we really need this kind of event to really celebrate and make evident the important work that journalists are doing worldwide. So I'm very pleased to have been able to sponsor this event, and I'm just really honored to be able to host it here at Villanova. And to give a formal welcome from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, my colleague and friend, Dr. Crystal Lucky, the Associate Dean for Baccalaureate Studies for the college, is going to welcome us all formally. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and welcome to everyone on this cold Saturday afternoon. I want to give a very warm welcome to the Kraebel Allen family, and also to the photographers of the War Zone Freelance Project. This is a very beautiful and sobering exhibit, and on behalf of the College of Arts and Sciences, I want to say thank you to the photographers for this work. And it's important for a number of reasons, but at least two come to my mind as I stand in this space. And one is about the importance of the liberal arts. And the communication department at Villanova is one of our flagship departments because of the variety of work that it allows our students to focus on. And as I'm looking at what, sort of to piggyback on what Heidi Rose was saying, that there is a kind of visual poetry, I think, that is going on. I'm a scholar of African American literature, and so I'm always thinking in literary terms. And there is a kind of arresting quality to this work that causes us to stop and to think. But also, I think that it opens up a space for us to be able to talk and to reason. And as Brian said, there is no more important time that I think we're in right now that we need to stop and to reason and to think and to work together. So again, on behalf of the College of Arts and Sciences, thank you for coming and taking this time to honor Chris's memory, but also to stop and to think and to reason about what's going on in our world. Thank you, Heidi, for sponsoring this and the work that you've done. And again, thank you all for coming.
So now it's my pleasure to introduce the curators of this exhibit and foundation of the War Zone Freelance Project, Anna Elling and O.C. Greenway.
Hello, and thank you all very, very much for coming out on a Saturday. It's really nice to see this many people showing up. And thank you to Heidi, to Villanova University, and to the Waterhouse Institute for making this possible. My name is, as you heard, Anna Elling. I'm a Danish reporter and writer. I've been covering conflict for the past several years. Mainly in the Middle East. I've been covering conflicts in Israel, Palestine, Iraq, Libya, and while working as a freelancer, I met some of all these people that are in this exhibition, and together with O.C. Greenway, who is here, and some other of the contributing photographers, we founded the War Zone Freelance Project. And today we want to tell you both something about the exhibition and also about the War Zone Freelance Project and the idea behind what we are doing. It started out, OC will tell a little bit more about it, I think, but it started out as an exhibition idea and has since developed into a bigger project. Today we do exhibitions, we do various different kinds of exhibitions, and the World Conflict Exhibition is one of them. And then we also do medical safety trainings for freelance journalists. We do talks, we do panel discussions, all to share and support the work of freelance journalists covering conflict. And I think before we talk about the exhibition, we were going to talk a little bit more about the medical safety trainings that we do. A thing that is, like one thing is what we see as a result of what the freelance journalists do. Another thing is to prepare journalists to do their job and make them capable of doing it in a secure way. This is O.C. Greenway. He's the founder of the project, and he'll tell us more about the training.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a little bit taller here. All right. All right. Welcome, and thank you again for having us, Heidi and Bryan and Villanova University. This is the Warzone Freelance Project. As Anna was saying, this section, this exhibition is the World Conflict Exhibition. So it is set up amongst freelance journalists throughout the world. We have in the back, as you can see, we have Colombia, and these are all freelance journalists that work locally or internationally, covering conflicts either in their home or abroad. And freelancing is something that a lot of people do not really take into consideration when they watch the news, or they think of a staff journalist going out and, you know, in his shiny body armor and his TV van. So we're kind of the other side of journalism, that we like to, the community that we have, come together and share to the public internationally what's been going on that we've seen through our cameras and through our writings. As Anna's a reporter, we have a lot of writers that are part of the Warzone Freelance Project. Yeah, it's been quite a journey. We started in 2015, as Anna was saying. After coming back from Iraq, I worked as a desk producer for a freelance agency and had several videographers and photographers working for me. And we were just like, there's so much information that is still left on hard drives, and stories that we were supposed to send and sell, and you know, with the media time cycle, we weren't able to sell it. So it's just like, this is incredible stuff. So we would really like to accumulate all these people's hard work into a place where we can share with the public what's going on. To the right, we have, as Anna was saying, Christopher Allen, who passed away in August, and I'd like to welcome his parents, two incredible, phenomenal people. Christopher Allen was one of our first contributors to the World Conflict Exhibition, and a true joy to be around, and an incredible journalist. So it's our honor to share his work continually, and we will continue. On the left-hand side, we have Mohan Beckett, who is an 18-year-old Syrian photojournalist who was killed in a battle at Kitab Hospital. And we brought his work. We spoke with his mother and asked if we could share it, because one of our journalists was using him as a fixer before he got into photojournalism, and his story was incredible. Instead of fighting, joining the rebellion and joining the FSA or the Free Syrian Army or another rebel group, he grabbed the camera and wanted to document this war. And ironically enough, his editor was actually another individual who grew up in the Lebanese Civil War. And before he went out at age 16 to join a Christian militia, his mom said, "Give that gun back to that man, and here's a camera." So Moham's story is absolutely incredible. And we will carry these people who have really definitely made a mark on our lives and our hearts with us wherever we go. So should I talk on the trainings real quick?
Yeah, maybe one thing, I think, as OC talked about, one thing, the freelance journalism is special. And I have been, since I've started journalism, started as a freelance journalist, you really get to, throughout the years, I've learned the importance of the community of freelancers. If you are staff journalist, photographer for a certain media, you have your colleagues in the media house. But for us freelancers, we're more on our own, and I think often people think about freelancers as this lonely person running around there and working completely on our own. And
for free.
I couldn't do much of what I've been doing without having other journalists around me, other freelancers to go out and report with, to share fixers with, to just talk about your ideas with. It's like, I have this idea to do this story, what do you think about it, what could be good for context? There are so many things that you don't see when you just read the final article in the newspaper and say, oh, and Erling wrote this article for this in this newspaper. There's so much more behind it, and that's another thing that we want to share both with this exhibition, but with the Warzone Freelance Project in general, to give like an inside look of this big operation behind freelance journalism, and where it's really important that we have a community and that we can help and support each other.
Yeah, every one of these journalists that are a part of this exhibition is vetted, by our group. So they base overseas, they work in depth on a topic they're covering. Many of them, their stories that are on the world are award-winning. They've won even World Press Photo. They're really incredible people and are extremely dedicated to their work. And that's kind of a qualification that we look for when contributors are coming in and wanting to share in the tours that we do. So currently, right now, I just wanted to give you guys a little update. We have a Battle for Mosul exhibition. Anna and I and several other colleagues covered the entire offensive to retake Mosul from the Islamic State group, and that's going to be one hell of a show. And we also have individual exhibitions for the photographers individually. So a lot of them have their own shows. We'll update them on social media and stuff like that. Another thing too, she was saying how much we developed from when we first started. We wanted to do smaller places and still continue working, but we saw that the public everywhere we went, all over Europe, man, it was incredible. The reciprocation and the type of the response that we would get from people coming in to view this exhibition. And when we met Chris, he came to our Brussels exhibition at the Brussels Press Club, and people were coming in off the street, and he covered Ukraine at the time. And this lady came in and she said she's never seen her country. She's from Ukraine, and they talked for 30, 40 minutes. And in one of the photos that we had displayed that Chris had, she said she knew this area and it was destroyed. And it was just incredible to see that type of people. And that's when you get into journalism, that's what you go for. You want that photo. People would always say, this photo is not going to change the world, but maybe it will change one person. And that's great. Somebody will look at that, and next time they look at the news, they'll think differently. I don't know how they'll think, but hopefully it'll be with a wider view on humanity and see what the hell's going on around this place. So we did go from exhibitions to trainings. We found out that there's major gaps in the freelance community. A lot of journalists are going out, some without body armor, some without healthcare as well, some without medical training and combat safety. There's a lot of eager journalists who have big hearts to tell stories about people in Syria, people in Iraq, people in Somalia, et cetera, but it is extremely dangerous, and if you are not covering every base, anything could happen, absolutely anything. So we try our best to tailor a training. We did a training in Iraq for over 40 journalists to cover the Mosul offensive, where nobody else would go. We asked other training companies. They said, no, we're not going to do it unless you want to, charge us $50,000 for a trainer or something. It was extremely expensive because it was a conflict area. We managed to get an entire training situation together. It was our first training ever, and thankfully it was absolutely incredible. And within days, people who were trained, the journalists that were trained with us, one of them actually saved an Iraqi colonel's life who was shot in the lung. That's an incredibly hard thing to do. This guy has no medical background, and he was in Paris Match. He was photographed all over for saving this guy's life. And he decided actually he wants to get in the medical field. So we were like, man, we think you have a talent. And I can't express to you all how much. I know every one of these people that are represented, the journalists here, and they are absolutely incredible people. And I encourage you to look their names up, follow them on their social media, see what they're really phenomenal individuals. So we can't do this project without trying our best to help them to be more safe in the field, because these people are our family. You know, to a lot of these people on the wall, this is the only family they have. You know, so yeah.
And one other thing that has been important for us when we've been touring with the exhibition, we've toured it through Europe at different galleries, but also at a lot of universities and colleges focused on communication and journalism. And I think from the beginning, everybody that in this project, we've always talked about, remember when we started out as journalists, some have been studying journalism, and then you come out with an idea, an understanding from your education what journalism is. But journalism, like many other crafts, but I really think especially journalism is something that you have to do to really understand what it is, and that can be really hard to learn that in an education facility. So it's been very important for us to go and share the experiences of these journalists to students with an ambition to do journalism, and kind of give them like a direct insight to what this profession is, and especially to what freelance journalism is, because it is the reality that more and more journalists are going to go out and become freelancers. That is, there's lower budgets for international reporting and less like staff correspondence being sent out. So freelance journalism is the majority of the news you watch and read is produced by freelancers. So it's important for us to talk to students and kind of discuss this reality that they're going to come out to afterwards.
Yeah. And another thing, one of our main focuses with this exhibition is to support the work of local freelancers and fixers. So locals, when we say locals, we're speaking more to the aspect of actual journalists who are from the areas of conflict, working to produce news or help journalists produce their work in that country. And we call them fixers. So Mohan Beckett was a fixer first, and then he basically learned the ropes of the business very quickly, and he became an incredible photojournalist that was, covers of New York Times. I mean, he really went for it. So we do a lot of local work. We did training specifically for locals with translators, and because without them, none of the work here will not be on the walls without these locals. And when you see this, big story published in New York Times or whatever, Time Magazine, whatever, usually you will not see the byline of the people who got that journalist that story. And without those people, it would not exist. So we really push hard for protection of these local journalists. Bryan was talking about how the press is being, battered by, obviously with the situation, with the current political situation. But we do not have a problem here compared to these countries where they will just drive up to your door, put a hood over your head, and throw you in the back of a car. I mean, there's just no joke in these countries, and these journalists need that support, and they need someone to speak for them internationally. So we've done exhibitions in Berlin and brought some of the journalists out. Benjamin Hiller, the gentleman on the board right there in the middle, actually helped rescue a Syrian fixer that he worked with while he was covering the Syrian conflict, out to get him outside of Syria, because as soon as you start working as a fixer to help international journalists cover a war that the country does not want shown, you're in a pretty deep hole. And so is your family, your mother, your family, anybody that knows you, that lives around you, your neighbors. You're in deep. So there's a lot of really incredible stories with every individual on here, and that's just a great one, him helping out with the help of the Rory Peck Trust, get a fixer outside of the conflict area. So,
And that's something that we're going to talk more about on Thursday. On Thursday, we will also show a film we have on local journalists and fixers. So for those of you who hadn't had enough after today, come back on Thursday.
and there will be a fixer actually Skyped in, so, and he will have some great stories, or she actually is. Okay, so welcome. We would like to introduce to you Joyce and John Allen. And they want to speak, we'd like them to speak on Christopher Allen. So if you all would give them your attention and a round of applause for coming out tonight, I really appreciate it.
First of all, I want to thank everybody for being here, and thank you for all those who helped organize this. It's pretty powerful to see so many people here, and thank you again. It feels kind of surreal that we're here, Joyce and I, doing this, but there you go. Chris was killed actually on the 26th of August last year. It was kind of shocking. We were in California having a good time. We were Joyce's brother, staying with him, and we got this ominous email from the State Department, and then we called the State Department and the embassy and heard the news. It was all very, very shocking. I think even when Chris was born, he had an international perspective from the very beginning. He, as you can hear, I'm British, I'm English, and Joyce is of Armenian American heritage. So, and at the table there was always talk of the world and conversations, sometimes very animated conversations about the state of the world. But from a very early age, Christopher knew the world. One of his favorite a little table mat he had when he was very young, I remember, was this one of the world, which he loved. So in a way, the path was set from very early on. He was raised in Lower Merion here in Narberth, and went to school in Lower Merion, and up until high school when he went to Germantown Friends School, and that had and it's a Quaker school where there was far from conflict as you could hope a kid could be, perhaps, ironically enough. A Germantown Friends School, the Quakers have this pacifist slant, but that had a profound influence on him, being at that school for 4 years, I believe. He graduated from University of Pennsylvania, but like his path, he didn't have a straight path, Chris. He started off at this very la-di-da university, St Andrews in Scotland, and then he didn't like that, and he transferred to, of all places, Temple, which was almost like the flip side of St Andrews. And then eventually he worked his way to finish his degree at Penn. And I think over those 3 universities, which is pretty unusual for a kid to go to 3 universities in 4 years, he really did get like a very broad perspective that was unusual, that most kids at 20 years old, 21 years old wouldn't have on the world around him. So that was pretty unique, I think. And then, because he had a dual citizenship, he was British as well. He took advantage, and for me personally, it's sort of sad that Britain's leaving the EU, but he took advantage of his European heritage as well by doing a master's degree in history at the University of Leiden, Sorbonne, Paris, and Oxford. He's in a special degree packaged at these three cities. And so that again gave him a perspective on the world, and he was able to travel very widely while he was in Europe, and he relished all of that. After towards the end of his time in his master's degree, he was getting a little jaded with all the academia and everything, and so he spoke to a professor at Oxford who suggested that he see more history in the real, being made, rather than getting it from the textbook or whatever, that he needed to be out in the world, really seeing history being made. And while his cohort was going off to the Greek islands or the south of Spain or something, Christopher chose for his spring break to go to Ukraine, where, if you remember back in 2014, the country was coming apart at the seams. Russia had taken over Crimea, Yanukovych had been ousted, and Christopher arrived in Donetsk in eastern Ukraine, and the whole place was coming apart. And he was in the midst of a revolution when he was there. And I think it had a very profound effect on him. He was still young, very young, still a semester away from finishing a degree, and what he saw in eastern Ukraine had a huge impact on him, I think, and it set him on a path, I think, that sadly it came to an all too short end after 3.5 years, but you know, the richness of his life was perhaps incredible. I'm sorry, I'm losing my notes, but I think when he first went to Ukraine, when it was all melting down, he saw there people fighting for a cause, people who were prepared to put their lives on the line, which, you know, I think most of us don't witness in our lives. And this had a huge impact on him, that people were prepared to sacrifice so much for sometimes very questionable ideals. But I think he became very interested in what these people were about and wanted to explore more about them. And hence he started to embed with the volunteer battalions on the front line in eastern Ukraine. And I think he was very interested in the soldiers. I think he saw the camaraderie between people, and there was an incredible mix of people, a very diverse group of people, from college students to older men to patriots, whatever. And he really saw life in the raw. I think when people's lives are on the line, he saw life to its full extent. And he was really, truly living with these people. He was eating with them, sleeping with these folks, being shot at, being shelled at, And in 2014, 2015, in Ukraine, it was extremely dangerous, I think. I think more than his parents ever knew or he said. But it was something that he saw as people really seeing humanity in its fullest. And he wanted to explore that more fully. He went to some of the most volatile and dangerous parts of Ukraine. You see on the pictures here places that he went to. I was going to mention 3 other places he was at that aren't photographed there. Marinka and Pisky and Shirokina, all highly dangerous and flashpoints in that war. He found that as a freelancer, he did find it frustrating at times that his stories would be even stolen, or they would come out before he could publish, or he couldn't publish. And he found that at times he was very, had contempt for the mainstream media. They'd visit the front line for 2 hours. They'd make a phone call to a commander on the front line or something from some cozier hotel in Kiev. I think and there was that sort of been there, done that kind of thing. They would come in for a few hours and they'd just leave. Whereas Christopher wanted the greater nuances of a story, the context of a story, which the mainstream media really didn't have the time or the energy or the will to get. And that frustrated him a bit, because frequently his story didn't get out. And I think that is the plight of many freelancers, that happens to them. And they take all the risks. They spend their own money. They have no security, of no minders of any sort. They have to do all their own research. They have to find people. They create their own network. And Christopher found, despite the language, he didn't know Ukrainian when he went to Ukraine. He didn't have a flair for languages particularly, but he managed somehow, incredibly, to find this incredible network. And he knew so many people, and he knew so much about this country. I mean, some people said actually that perhaps he knew more about Ukraine than virtually any other English-speaking person, and particularly he knew about the front line. So I don't know if that's true or not, but he had incredible knowledge in the few years he was there. I've got to be careful what I do. It's time. Okay, I'm sorry. I think when as the war in Ukraine wound down, he wanted to find new projects, and some of the things he always was looking for those forgotten places in the world. The Syrias, the Iraqs he would have claimed everybody was there. Ozzy was there. So he wanted to be in those forgotten corners that didn't get the publicity. There wasn't anybody writing about it. And so he chose to go to South Sudan, much to our concern because we knew it was a pretty dangerous place. And I wanted to just say that I think it's very important that we support freelance journalists, that governments support freelance journalists, and the mainstream media do more to support freelance journalists. They are so insecure, so vulnerable because there's no protection for these people, that more needs to be done. I perhaps haven't articulated it very well, but we feel very sad, and the sadness doesn't leave us. And things like this almost seem unreal to us, that we're here speaking of this kind of thing, but we just want to support freelancers and keep them safe and keep them well-resourced. So thank you, all those people here, who's Ozzy and Anna, for being our friends and enabling us to put this on, and thank you, Heidi, and all the other folks who have helped here. So thank you.
There's a little sign on our refrigerator that was sent to me by a friend many years ago. It reads, "Raising boys is an extreme sport." When I received it, I was trying to keep up with our active elementary school children. I had no idea how hard this journey would be. After all, it brings me right here. Chris was an incredibly enthusiastic, exuberant, bigger-than-life child and adolescent. He tried new things with gusto. He told stories, and he loved to listen to them. His earliest readings were about explorers, Robert Ballard. He was 3 years old. He started to learn how to read because he wanted to know more about Robert Ballard, Hillary and Tenzing, Mallory and Shackleton, later Rory Stewart and Wilfred Thesiger. His adventuresome spirit took him to the very top of the jungle gym, to Pakistan, to Ukraine, to South Sudan. Whether Chris was building trains that spanned our whole third floor with his brother, or writing a senior thesis on the Mau Mau uprising in British Kenya, he exhibited curiosity, focus, and an incredible desire for excellence. He was the kid who was not distractible when he was passionate about a task at hand, and easily distracted when the task held no interest. John said he went to Ukraine during his master's thesis program, and something happened for him there in Western Ukraine. Something took root as he witnessed people fighting for their lives and their homes and their way of life. History was in the making, and he did what he loved to do the most. He listened to people's stories, and he wrote about them. He began to see himself, I think, as a recorder of unfolding events, but from the historian's perspective. What's the context of these events? Why now? What precipitated the current situation? How are these lives impacted by these events, and what will change because of them? He went to Donetsk to live after he graduated, and because he was so close to the carnage of Malaysian flight MH17, he was one of the first people at that site. Listen to what he wrote for the Telegraph. Among the debris, the banal seems to be as striking as the death. There is an I Love Amsterdam t-shirt, a Sylvanaire Paris picture frame, toiletries, food, and clothing. All seemed so fundamentally human and yet so far removed from the bodies scattered around. He goes on to say, in a huge field of chest-high sunflowers behind the village of Razipnaya, a large chunk of fallen wreckage has flattened the crop and created a grim clearing. Here appears to be the place where the section of Boeing 777, which carried the mail, has fallen. On the ground amid the metal are letters and parcels. One box has burst open, showing a new pair of bright pink trainers. Next to this are the envelopes. One reads Priorité and has been posted to a man in Perak, Malaysia. Another is to a doctor in Perth, Australia. And then there is another body. Chris saw something else in those fields behind Rasipnaya. He saw representatives of the mainstream media who came a day after, 2 days after, or 3. He heard reporters say things like this: "Now that we have some photos of body parts, let's get going." Chris perceived a disregard of the solemnity of the place, and this was, after all, where 298 people had lost their lives. In his descriptions and images, he wanted to capture the human dimension of such a tragedy. He wanted to tell about the victims and their families, the teens who witnessed the event, and the miners who became rescue workers. And it's here, I think, that Chris began to see himself as someone who wanted to write about these events and places and issues and people that the mainstream media had little time for. He wanted to write in-depth articles to explore complexities and nuances. He was driven to understand. He saw the power of the written word and the visual image. He developed his craft as a writer and a photographer. It is here, in that field, that a freelance journalist was born. You know, I don't get why Chris was drawn to conflict. It's taken me a while to wrap my head around that. He lived in Ukraine since 2014 and embedded with volunteer battalions, as John said, to find out what was happening on the front line. He got so frustrated with reports that told of those places that were secondhand or biased or really old news. So he wanted to experience and write about real events in real time. As a family, we were very pacifist, actually. He grew up in a home that was concerned more about the collateral damages of war, the loss of life, the displacement, famine. We talked a lot around our dinner table about nonviolent solutions to conflict. War took lives, and each life lost impacted dozens of others. We know that all too well now. He and I talked about this so often. What is it, Chris, that draws you to conflict? I began to see that for him, conflict was like a tangled ball of yarn. He was the historian, keen to untangle the strands of culture, religion, politics, economics, history, hidden, yet to some extent exposed in these conflict situations. So last year it was time to find a new place to explore. He went to South Sudan because he thought it was underreported. You're going to see now from his videos and hear in his writing that he did his best to tell that story. Reuters journalists went in for less than 24 hours to cover the battle in which Chris lost his life. Chris had spent 3 weeks living with the boys and men that comprised the rebel battalion. He wanted to know who they were, why they fought, what loved ones did they leave behind. He wanted to eat what they eat. He wanted to sleep where they slept. And in order to do so, they needed to accept him and to trust him. And he had to sacrifice comfort, suspend judgment, and simply observe. He immersed himself fully. I just want to read you a few excerpts from his field notes. This was a conversation with the deputy commander. Quote, "He tells me they have people here from 8 to 80. There is no good life for guerrillas. These are a group of young boys here, their uniforms ill-fitting. They are all orphans." from the communications coordinator of the SPLA-IO. The famine was because of the war. At the beginning of the planting seasons, people had already left for Uganda. They couldn't live here. That's what brought in the famine. Locals would sneak back at night to cultivate their fields, but all this sneaking is dangerous, so we had to secure the area. Chris tries to understand why these boys and men were prepared to fight. The reason we pick up arms, said one, is to bring stability. We are coexisting with tribes without any problems, no matter what the government says. We are not fighting a tribe. We are fighting the government in totality. The reason we picked up arms? We need reform. Finally, here is a piece of writing about his place, the place where he spent the last 3 weeks of his life. The road from Uganda is okay. The roads in South Sudan are immediately much worse. Clearly, some of these tracks were roads once, even paved, but now they are just decaying dirt tracks being overtaken by dirt and vegetation. I am struck by the thought that this is still a very organic place where life is still connected very much to the earth itself. The houses are built from mud extracted from the local riverbank and from wood and thatch. The diet is almost completely locally grown. The people are subject to the capriciousness of their surroundings. Famine, sickness, and war, which seems to be a perpetual and an organic product of life here. The people seem like they could just melt back into the earth. The houses as if they could collapse and decay and be overtaken by vegetation. The roads as if they could instantly be swallowed up by the bush, by the dirt which covers them, and the vegetation which encroaches every day. But life is powerful here. During the day, there are the sounds of people talking in the little villages, a cacophony of animal noises that blend together. Dogs fighting, birds, insects. Vegetation grows large and rapidly. The human population all seems so young. And yet, what's happened to the old? Where are they? Dead mostly, I suppose. And this is the other side. Death seems a very close counterpart to life here. Difficult living conditions, war, famine, sickness, and death is never so far away. Villages burn or are abandoned. The crops are harvested, or not if there's a famine. Despite living here for so long, this civilization seems temporal and transient. This is also a spiritual place. Last night, late, it was dark, but the full moon was so bright that it lit up the huts and drew the field in shadows. Chris looked for the truth at all costs, seeking to understand the complexities of conflict in hidden regions of the world and the suffering that it created. He looked for the goodness in humanity, even in the direst of situations. I had a dream about Chris a few nights ago. I want to share with you an intimacy that I experienced in that dream. Chris came to tell us about the fate that awaited him. In my dream, he was very aware of how his time in South Sudan would end. Our family of 4 was eating at a favorite restaurant. He said he came to be with us one last time. I asked him what truly mattered about our years together. He gazed into the eyes of each of us, expressing profound love. Simply a gaze, no words. Then he took his hand and he allowed it to hover over the paper placemat of the world, much like the placemat he loved as a child, that sat at the table in front of him. Clearly, the world he had been curious about from his earliest days, the world he explored and the diversity of people within it, is what he sought to embrace with his life and with his work. Thanks.
I don't quite know how to put this, but is there any organization, news organization in the world, like let's say BBC, that's doing a good job in reporting actually what's going on in these revolutionary battles?
So the question was, is there any news organization doing a good job on reporting some of these underreported areas? And of course, BBC is, they do an incredible job. I've worked alongside BBC a couple times, and even I don't know how you guys feel, but CNN, they've done some pretty good stuff in Iraq when nobody else could get. There's a lot of the stuff you guys see. When I came home after working in Iraq, I was flipping through my mom's channels, and I was like, "This is the news you watch?" Like, what the hell is this? Like the stuff that I know the guys who worked for CNN reporting, and women who worked for CNN in Mosul, what they were reporting on, you barely see it on your CNN national news network. So maybe a glimpse, or but CNN World, maybe BBC World is incredible. A lot of the guys and people we worked with in Iraq, there's a lot of New York Times. They did great stories. We did some great stories as well. There's a lot of good news networks out there. You just got to look around. It's the viewer's responsibility to have due diligence and look through and cipher through news. Nobody's going to feed you everything that you need.
I think the message here is definitely not that there's no good journalism out there. I think it's quite the contrary. The journalists in this exhibition, but in general, journalists around the world make, to a great extent, incredible journalism. The thing is that if you only have 2 minutes to get updated on the world, you're not gonna get much. And I think that's often the issues. I do a lot of TV reporting, and and then you can then ask you, it's like, what's the situation in Iraq? You got 1 minute and 30 seconds. That's difficult. But then in some other programs, you have some more time, and you take it easy, and you take time to actually go into details. And there's a lot of that quality journalism out there, but it also takes time for the viewer, the audience, the reader to actually sit down and take the time to receive it.
And I'm sure it's also overwhelming.
Of course.
It's just like it's trying to choose cereal at a supermarket, man. There's like 40 freaking cereals, man. Like, screw it, I'll have toast, It's really overwhelming. There's so much news, and they touch on that a little bit in the film. Like, the number of freelancers has tripled. Technology is a lot more easier to obtain. Back in the day, getting a $4,000 film camera was not easy, and to use that thing properly was not easy. Now, you can grab a 5D Mark II for less than $1,000 and get out there and start working, Or use your iPhone. So these journalists in here are that we have displayed on the wall, like I said before, are vetted, proper journalists who do in-depth reporting in some of the darkest corners in the world, and this is the type of battle that we have, like we'll be, photographing or filming, and then here comes a bus of like 20, journalists from all over the world with iPhones, and it's really has become saturated, was my point, and but that also makes it more interesting for you guys to find the best news. It's really cool when you find a great story. And you learn about something that no other agency's been able to report on. Anna and I, when we were working in Iraq, and with another writer, Igor Kosov, we found the only civilian resistance in Mosul to battle against ISIS from within. And the rumors were out that there was a resistance group, a young resistance group, who set up ambushes and would attack ISIS checkpoints, and so on and so on. And so we started, traveling around east and west Mosul looking for these resistance fighters, and in refugee camps, and we ended up finding informants to the coalition who actually laid out positions for. They worked as taxi drivers, they worked as dentists, they worked, and that was the resistance, and that was mind-blowing, because I was always under the impression it was, a bunch of guys, starting an underground resistance group, and it was individuals resisting the best they could against the terror group.
And I think the thing is with a story like this one, for instance, it takes time. Like, it took us weeks to do this story. So if you're sent in and you say, okay, you have 3 days now, go in and tell us what's going on in Iraq, it's not going to happen. It takes time, and it takes research, and it takes resources. And that is, as the journalist also explained in the video, that's often the challenge you meet, that you want to do a great job, you want to put time and effort into it, but it also has to be possible.
Yeah, so along with that time and effort, this medium of an exhibition is a place where those stories and people like Frederico, hold on, I got this really cool.
Oh,
There we go. Frederico here in the back. She was like, what the? So right here we have Frederico Rios. He's been working on the story covering the FARC, against the government of rebellious group in Colombia. And, he's won many awards for his completion of this work after the FARC's, so-called disband of their and laying down of their weapons. But this was a long-term story. I mean, you can't call up New York Times and say, hey, I want to do, a story for 4 years, so.
But it wasn't in the New York Times.
Yeah, pieces of it. It ended up, yeah. But so like in this type of medium, you could come in and view a long format story, because in the mainstream media, literally you pitch, they go, okay, we want this, get it to us, at the end of the week. And I'm like, man, like this is, I need at least 2 weeks here, buddy. Like this is frontline work, They're like, well, I mean, in a week or, yeah, so anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, so the promise of the internet was that basically easy flow of information.
Yeah.
What you're describing is really a situation where what's called the mainstream media is really, at least for the United States, and probably outside of the United States as well, really the main source of information.
Yeah.
That is it. I mean, is there anything else? I mean, is there so is it not possible to shape an internet channel which would be fed by freelancers, for instance?
How much money you got, man? Okay. Right. And that's another thing I want to everybody in the room. I mean, that's how you build that, is with money. I've worked with freelance groups, like I said before. I was a desk producer in Iraq twice, and financially, it's impossible to maintain as a freelancer without a hub group, an agency or somebody to jump in. And there's also under Chris's memorial, the Allen family has a memorial to help freelancers. And also WZF, we use that financial support for medical trainings for journalists going to cover conflict. But when I hear that question, this is the thing about freelancers, is that if you find one and they're willing to be followed or they want to share. I mean, a lot of the guys and women, I say guys, they want to share. They're on Twitter every day. They're on Instagram they want to get these stories out, So for instance, if you were following the Mosul offensive, we worked there when there was roughly 15 journalists covering the entire battle against ISIS. Then Mosul came and there must have been, 1,000. You know what I mean? Like the entire world showed up. And not all of them got to the front line and did but those who did were sharing, trying to show the world what's going on here. So if you take responsibility of your viewership of the international news, maybe ask somebody, where can I find something, look at Twitter, look at these places, and you could actually follow them individually, And I'm sure there are groups on Instagram or social media, Facebook and so on, that share into a feed. You don't really have to watch Fox or CNN or whatever. It's out there and you could obtain it on your own. And that takes a little bit of inspiration. So I hope this exhibition was that inspiration.
And I think also remember that there is still much more than the internet. there's a fall in newspapers, but there are still some incredible actual newspapers out there. I work for a Danish newspapers. Their policy is that they only come out in print. They're not online, they're not on Twitter, they're not on any kinds of social media, and the articles are long. It's like double-sided. Sometimes it takes a while
like
to
3,000 words.
and these, like, that newspaper is a newspaper. It's published in Denmark. It's a newspaper that the Danes will buy for the weekend. It only comes out on the weekend, and then they will read that newspaper that weekend. And I think that really shows that it's just one media. It's just one medium that you can spend so much time on. But if you go on Twitter, you will be so distracted by so many things all the time. It's like, oh, scrolling, and I see this, write this, like, how long will it take to read the article? It's like reading time 6 minutes or something.
Yeah.
It's like, oh shit, I can get this one real quick in 6 minutes, and then could go over to this one in 10 minutes. I think that's very stressful. So I think to remember that we have, like, the old newspaper that they are still put a lot of resources into, and there are some incredible journalism out there.
And go ahead.
Just this is related to that question to some degree. What do you see the role of universities in this, and that you have some places like Johns Hopkins, for example, with their school of journalism, and the international schools, things like that. Obviously, some local places helping out. It seems there might be more room for either centers or other within the schools within universities to help pick up the tab for some of that sort of thing.
That sounds wonderful. Once again, if you'd like to get on our website. No, we have a thing for universities, and we've been to the King's College in London, the War Studies Department, and done an exhibition there. Spoke with the students, City University, universities in Denmark and Scotland, and we have I remember going to school, Anna remembers going to school, and you don't learn what you need to learn if you're going to get into conflict or humanitarian photography or videography or reporting, whatever, journalism. So we go there, and a lot of the journalists, especially are the professors. One of them was he covered Bosnia. Bosnia was one of the hardest things to cover, and since the Lebanese Civil War, like, it was intense, and he was just saying, like, please give it to them, like, that, they a lot of them in the class of about 40 desired to cover conflict, and we said, like, where are they with this, where do we start? And they said, just give it to them the way, I know, we spoke the same language, just give it to them, and we gave it to them, and these students received it in a way that they were like, I'm going to not rethink my, it's not like we're like scared, scare you out of following your dreams, but we want you to be responsible. And I also feel the universities need to be responsible for the changing media landscape, the changing job landscape. You can't tell a bunch of kids who are paying $70,000 a year, hey, you're going to work for, BBC, good luck, buddy. And you're not going to work for BBC. You're going to get out there, swim around the fishbowl a little bit, and end up as a freelancer, So I think there should be a reality check, and I think that's where universities step in, and we're here to help as well. We love sharing with people who care about what's going on in the world. So.
And I think, let freelancing be a part of curriculum. I studied journalism university for 6 years, and when I was done, I really didn't know what freelancing was at all. I didn't know how to pitch an article, because what I had learned, and that's just for where I studied, was the craft of journalism, but the reality of where I needed to navigate was different. So I think it's very important to teach students about the essence of freelancing, and it is really hard to grasp what it actually is, and it takes a lot of doing it before you really get it, I think.
Yeah, and another thing that we do with the project is a platform called Sessions. So, and that's actually where we met Chris. Is freelancers, would write us and say, hey, I got a question. And we're saying, oh, hey, well, let's set up a time. So we set up a time. We started talking about
It's online.
online session. So similar to a Skype where you're talking and sharing each other's photos, but on our platform you can share photos, videos, and go over them with several different people. So it's a group session, and you know, that's a place. I mean, it's not wide enough to where we can have, you know, maybe classes through this session period, because our focus right now and within our means is immediate. So it's freelancers who are actually covering conflict. So, but yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there to expand, and we hope to. So. Go ahead.
Will you be returning to more conflict zones yourself?
We just did 9 months in Mosul, so we really feel like taking not just a break. I mean, if something happens, whatever. But just like this exhibition, you see, you can imagine what happened in Mosul, and the images and the work that the people who are contributing to that exhibition needs to be put together well, and needs to be shown and displayed properly. So that takes time. It's not an overnight kind of situation. So we want to devote that time, and a lot of our guys in Europe are also working in. So we have an exhibition opening in Denmark at the Copenhagen Photo Festival, her hometown actually, and that's going to be incredible. So for this time, we feel like to reorganize. You know, we went as a project to Iraq, and to do these trainings, we rented an enormous house known as the Castle, or I think it was the Fortress or something. There was already a castle there, and we did medical trainings in the home and invited freelancers from all over the world to come stay. It's not like we were like biased toward staffers, but we wanted to help freelancers. So we had a lot of people come in and say, hey, I work for the New York Times. Is it okay if I stay here? You have an extra room? I'm like, hey, man, sorry, dude. I'm sure you've got a big budget, and I would love to have you stay here. But no, so we focused strictly on freelancing, and all of our trainings were for freelancers only, because our options are extremely limited, like John was saying. I'm sure he knew with Chris calling him and, you know, updating him like, man, you know, it's just him out there. You know, he doesn't have an editor to call to, you know, if he gets wounded, to come pick him up on a plane. You know what I mean? It's really just you, and your community that you build, so we try to strengthen that community.
And the thing often with freelancers too is that, like, a lot of the people we had staying in the house, they would come and stay for 5 months, and so they can't come for 5 months and stay in a hotel room. It's a different kind of engagement where you come and you really move there. So we had, like, I think we were like 15 journalists in the house, all freelancers, that, as I mentioned earlier too, that a very important community of people who help each other out. And
I mean, literally from all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, like every corner, Brazil, Italy, El Salvador, as the people who showed up to cover this, who cared to show up and cover this, it was just absolutely incredible. And when the staffers, you know, would come and stay in like the most incredible 5-star hotel that we all like kind of
went to dinner.
we went for dinner, you know. No, but we stayed, you know. They'd come for a month, 2 months, and they'd have to go because that's their time up. But we were, as a freelancer, like we were, you know, in the video, you can stay as long as you want, as long as you can financially, and work on a project, you know, and cover a topic. So.
We can talk all night.
Yeah, this is aggressive. Anybody got any other questions? Oh, one last one.
Yeah, I'm just curious, what about from a psychological perspective, giving support to freelancers? I have a couple of friends who are photojournalists, freelance photojournalists, and, you know, there's a lot clearly that goes on that I don't know, but just from the stories that they tell, and I'm just wondering if there's anything that your organization does on that front.
Yeah, we our trainings is where we touch that topic, because it's a very touchy topic. You know, you have different levels. Everybody's on different, you know what I mean? Some guys have been but working for 10, 15 years, you know, and the other guys just start out 2 years ago, you know, and they jump right into conflict. So we combine that into trainings. We have mental health experts who come in, and we talk on a level to where we are actually in a training together, and it was really like, I mean, there's guys in there who still have shrapnel in their neck and stuff, and here's this woman, sorry, I'm just getting on my soapbox here, but here's this woman who comes in, she's never covered a conflict. She was 19, just graduated from college, talking to a bunch of, you know, conflict journalists and, you know, active conflict journalists as well. So it's like, I found it really hard to sit through the whole thing. So we're very sensitive to that, and we know a lot of people who, you know, we reach out to, and eventually when we're going to hopefully do a training in Philadelphia in honor of Christopher Allen, and we will incorporate the mental health issues in there. So, but yeah, it's definitely a big issue. So in a lot of freelance and journalism organizations, CPJ, Rory Peg Trust, you know, a lot of these guys are out there trying to push for that. And I mean, even when Christopher died, they reached out to us and said, "Hey, man, if you need to talk, we have some therapists. You know." And we were like, "Oh, thank you so much. You know, that's really kind of you guys to take the time and help each other out." So that's what it's about, you know. So, all right, thanks for coming, everybody. I really appreciate it.